Chimera of the Chapel by Bleakmidwinter. Summary. When Will Graham wakes up from a coma 3 months after the fall, Jack reveals that Hannibal Lecter didn't survive. Outside the realm of Hannibal's influence, Will decides to discover the full truth behind the world's sudden and seeming falsehood. Everybody seems to hold their own opinion on Hannibal's fate, but Will knows better than anyone that trust and honesty are as elusive as death. For those of you concerned, no, Hannibal isn't actually dead. This story is narrated by Will Graham.
And Hannibal Lecter.
Will plans to rendezvous with Freddie on Monday evening. Leaving dirt early Sunday morning allows ample time for him to make the necessary stops. First, the Cliff House. Hannibal never bothered to blindfold Will in an effort to keep the location hidden, knowing full well he harbors an eidetic memory. He retains a near-perfect sense of direction and navigation thanks to the ability, so his truck is finally tweaked to full durability. He heads down the necessary back roads. Quietly rolling by the majestic white pines and butternut trees, the butternuts barren of leaves for the winter, the road steepens and memories start to return with a sprinkling of rainfall. They hadn't spoken in the car ride, but Hannibal and Will rarely ever talked in cars. It was like being chauffeured through purgatory. What else is there to say, other than, see you at the gates of hell? As the scent of the sea begins to waft through the window he's cracked open, Will ponders how the house is only a 30-minute drive from his and Molly's cabin. Hannibal had no indication of where Will was living before he crawled back into the sphere of his existence, let alone the fact it was purchased years in advance, even years before Abigail, before Will. For Miriam, for God knows who or what else, be that as it may, it rankles Will in a way he never expected. Maine, of all places. Hannibal hasn't left him for a second. He's always there, always out of reach, a shadow of a shadow. Though no more than a few months have passed, Will's first impression of the bluff is that it's eroded to a much greater extent than he saw it last. Strolling up to the edge of the cliff, his stomach flips from vertigo at the sight of the crashing waves and jagged rocks below. How they dodged what felt prophetic, Will may never know.
Soon all of this will be lost to the sea.
How right you were. Will finds the spare key under the stone he recalls. The authorities must have done a rough job combing the crime scene, otherwise it would have been confiscated. At first glance, the cliffside house seems much the same, except the carpet's been haphazardly torn from the tack strips lining the walls and impounded. Easier to discard bloodied fabric than it is to scrub the evidence of violence away. He imagines it says something about the state of the government in these matters. Hiding things will always be simpler than dealing with them out in the open. Will kneels beside the grand piano and touches the legs, expecting to see specks of Hannibal's blood the forensics team missed. There aren't any. Hannibal is someone they no doubt wanted to wipe clean from the earth, regardless if they succeeded in his annihilation or not. I'll take, or not, Will thinks to himself. The bedrooms are bare, stripped of all personality. What must have been Abigail's room, Will decidedly lingers in. He never bothered to tour the place when he was first here with Hannibal. He showered, ate dinner, and then shared that fateful nightcap with him. It was remarkable how seldom they spoke to each other here, considering the thousands of questions Will held about Abigail's life, about Hannibal's time in the BSHCI, Chilton, Alana, Jack. He wanted to know everything, and he was certain Hannibal wanted to know everything about Will, how he changed in those years away, if he still wanted, with every molecule in his body, not to think about him anymore. Will sends the thoughts packing with an ache-inducing shake of the head. He scrutinizes Abigail's sanctuary, navy blue walls, dark floorboards which would benefit from a light patterned rug. He imagines there was one, once, but they must have confiscated that too. He grits his teeth through his observations, growing increasingly disconcerted from the life he was locked out of, blinded to. Molly told him she wished he trusted her enough to open himself up entirely, to gut himself and display his entrails, as it were. He's done that for one person and one person alone. Will just wishes Hannibal had trusted him enough to do the same. But that was a long time ago. The visit to the house is subsequently an abortive effort at closure. He doesn't feel better or worse for having returned, and he's no closer than he was yesterday to finding Hannibal, but it was worth a shot. As he wraps up his sojourn, he catches a glimpse of an individual watching him from outside one of the floor-to-ceiling windows. When his eyes laser focus onto the cluster of trees just beyond the patio, he can't see even a whisper of a person. The sole thing he registered about the figure was that it was most likely a woman. She vanished before any further details translated. With quickening steps toward the front door, he paces out to the forest. But the mysterious onlooker is gone, nothing but a rustle of leaves deriving from an unknown direction to signify their corporeal existence. He snarls and returns to his car. He doesn't like being spied on. Yet, the wanderer of all things reminds him of his next stop. He collects himself for a much longer ride and sets the coordinates to Baltimore into his phone. Turning the radio on doesn't halt the train of thought chugging furiously through his mind. What he'll do with Bedelia if she has remained in America is a question which hasn't left his mind since the fever started, forcing him into bizarre, unwanted nightmares starring the silver-tongued bitch herself. He doesn't know how else to describe her. A few hours into afternoon traffic, his mind roams. He decides Bedelia reminds him of that old nursery rhyme. There was an old lady who swallowed a fly. While Will picks the lock of Bedelia's back door, after knocking courteously, of course, he reconsiders his decision to visit her house in broad daylight. Evening is beginning to blend into the blue sky with accents of plum and apricot, but if someone were observing the house, he's visually on full display. Consideration isn't enough to deter him. He enters her house with a purpose and can instantly tell she's been gone for a long time. She likely retreated as soon as Will warned her. He almost regrets doing so because he would have liked to. He's not altogether clear on what he would do in her presence again, high and mighty and acting as the rest of society has in the face of Hannibal Lecter's definite, unchallenged death. Will smirks, tracing fingertips along the walls of her abandoned home. Her absence does affirm his hunch. Bedelia isn't the type to succumb to a desultory lifestyle on nothing more than word of the press. She knows as well as he does there is hardly a likelihood Hannibal didn't survive the fall, if Will did. Or maybe, even better, Bedelia thinks Will may come after her, with or without the Ripper. The scalpel in his pocket doesn't disagree with the possibility, but he didn't bring it to kill her. He brought it, just in case. In this life he's chosen to lead, there is no room for error when it comes to defense, either for himself or what he set out to protect. And anyway, the scalpel was originally intended for Freddie, just in case. Will rummages through Bedelia's house, purposefully with less finesse than his scouring of the Cliff House. To degrade her in any sense feels like a victory. Personal possessions have been left behind with no obvious intent of safekeeping. She left in a rush. A cleanly person, it isn't difficult to categorize the disarray in Bedelia's bedroom, which vouches for the inference. Dresses hang off their hangers by a single strap. Shoes are knocked over unevenly along the underside of her bed. He has to wonder if she ran the day Will left her with a promise-riddled warning. Shampoo oozes out of a fallen bottle in her adjoining bathroom. It leaves the tile floor tacky. He's gotten what he came for. An answer to if Bedelia was clever or foolish. Unfortunately, she remains as clever as she always was. Clever, but rash. She did run away to Europe with a serial killer after all. At least Will had reasons beyond physical and material. He had obligations of family, of instinct. He realizes with unsteady hands and an erratic heart, he needs to know where exactly she disappeared to. He's not short-sighted enough to believe Hannibal could have returned to her for help and that they could have done what they did before. She would never. And Hannibal? Will closes his eyes and exhales. Hannibal almost certainly feels betrayed. Why else would he refuse to send for Will? But he wouldn't do that to him. Not again. Not after. He wraps his fingers around the scalpel in his pocket to ground himself and remind himself he isn't here to ruminate on Hannibal's motivations and feelings. Historically, he's played a part in ruining several opportunities for clarity and understanding between them by acting in a reactionary manner, wrought from overthinking and overanalyzing. In large, that was also due to Hannibal alienating him, betraying him, and consistently showing his loyalty the way a wild animal does, rather than verbally expressing himself. He thinks it's about time he and Hannibal communicate with their mouths, rather than with knives and hooks, or whatever else can be found in a kitchen. Will blushes and compels himself to leave Bedelia's bedroom. It's been so long since he's used his empathy for anything, he's not even sure if it'll work, but he moseys on down to the living room and sits in the seat Bedelia used to sit in and offer him unorthodox therapy. Here is where he can feel the strongest impressions of her decision-making. A throne to promote her autonomy. Golden colors swish across the blank scape of his closed eyes. As he steps into her shoes, that nursery rhyme comes back to mind. There was an old lady who swallowed a dog. She swallowed the dog to catch the cat. She swallowed the cat to catch the bird. She swallowed the bird to catch the spider. She swallowed the spider to catch the fly. Will's eyes open, and the expanse of her home is filtered in a yellow light. Morning beats through the windows, though night should currently be darkening the apertures. Bedelia sabotages herself each time she makes a choice. It's not entirely her fault, it's her nature, just as Will is ruled by his own. She hasn't yet swallowed a horse, but she's getting there, and she knows it too. The ticking clock must be growing louder, even piercing in her ears. Will can perceive the imprints of wild commotion on the air, and a faint smell of alkaline that signifies anxiety in magnitudes. She hadn't been thinking rationally when she ran. Her first idea of safety was a choice, and in the end, it will be her destruction. Bedelia's not hiding well, if she's hiding at all. He walks backward through the room, observing the symmetry of his vision with the vision he sees in real life. She is just as anal about her organization as she is about her compartmentalization. Not a thing is out of place, nothing except her passport. He used to see it on her desk occasionally when he arrived for therapy. It could be a coincidence, but it doesn't feel like one. Before Will can arrive at a definitive conclusion, the ground shudders beneath him, and it's more tangible than his empathy should allow. An unknown force coerces him to look up, and he collapses to his knees at the sight of hundreds of antlers curling and pistoning out of the ceiling. The texture of the ceiling has become something unsolid, but not altogether liquid. Either way, the antlers are reaching for Will. He scrambles back on his elbows, overcome with momentary fright. A horn pierces his chest right through his heart, and he snaps back into an unsaturated reality. He's sprawled across the rug in between two sofa chairs and panting like he's just run a marathon. He has an urge to paw at his chest and feel for an entry wound, but by now he knows there isn't one. He does have an answer to where Bedelia is, though. Death came from above. The end arrives at the beginning. Bedelia has returned to Italy. And Will has an inkling her end will arrive where her mistakes started. Fortunately for her, Will has more important things to do. Will pulls into a motel very late. He was hoping to sleep in the back of his truck, but his spine is killing him and he doesn't much care for the weather at present. After checking in, he parks in the far back. There's only a few cars scattering the parking lot, so at least there won't be ruckus keeping him up. He has trouble enough getting to sleep without any noise. He doesn't dare touch the shower, but takes a piss and plops down on the creaky mattress after purely removing his shoes and socks. He's more dozing than sleeping when 3 sharp knocks wake him. Will fingers the shape of the scalpel over his pocket, making sure it's still there, and stumbles over to the door, surprised to discover the manager standing there staring, discontented.
Sorry to wake you, sir. Normally I wouldn't even bother, but we got the hotel inspector coming early at some point tomorrow, and you parked pretty unevenly.
Oh, sorry, I'll fix it. Will doesn't remember doing that.
Thanks, pal.
Long after the manager vanished into the dimly lit lobby, Will scurries out into the cold of midnight and glares at the car. It looks completely, evenly parked to him. He turns around in several directions, half expecting to be pranked. He revs up the truck and parks it unevenly. The manager doesn't say a word when he checks out in the morning.
Okay, you consent to being recorded, yes?
As if it matters to you.
Answer the question, Graham.
Yes, I consent to the recording as long as my conditions are accommodated throughout.
Yeah, no talking about murder husbands, or, well, any of that.
Will rolls his eyes, hoping to all things left in the universe that are holy, she won't make a point in her article about how defensive he is on the subject. Only Freddie would accommodate his conditions conditionally. Freddie leans forward and balances her elbows on her knees. Her eyes are fiery with passion. He feels transported. 5 years in the past. She's even wearing the same clothes. Red skirt, red jacket, orange tights, all different shades of a singular hue. Immature, irritating.
So, Mr. Graham, you're something of an American hero. Can you tell us how you feel about that?
Really? This is the direction you're going?
I don't really feel up to starting a new recording. Would you please?
Will sighs dramatically, letting his eyes cruise around the Baltimore lounge. Magenta couches, tacky patterned walls. Almost as ugly as Freddie's entire persona. Fine. I didn't feel good at all.
Why is that?
I don't feel I did enough to warrant worship from a nation. I don't feel as if I hated the act of killing enough to be ruled a hero, he doesn't say.
You helped take down 2 of the most evil men this country has ever known. Surely that counts for something.
Freddie flatters the most when she's trying to swindle unsolicited information out of someone. Will has to smirk at that. At least some people never change. I took down Lecter. Lecter helped me take down Dollarhide. If anything, Lecter should get some credit as well. Freddie grimaces at that and he smiles wider. Objectively speaking, of course.
Forensics stated that you killed Dollarhide in self-defense. Is this true?
Yes. No, not entirely.
Did you kill Hannibal Lecter in self-defense?
Yes. No, not at all.
Can you describe the encounter as vividly as you can remember?
She asks, scribbling something down in one of her journals. He doesn't care what it is, psychoanalyzation or not. He tells her every detail without holding back, up until the part where Dollarhide succumbs to his wounds and he's left alone with Hannibal on the pinnacle of the bluff. Nothing but intimacy to saturate the blood and the gore, and the fact it felt as if they were the only 2 left breathing in the world. And then when the attack turned on me, I attempted to push Hannibal off the cliff. At the last moment, he dragged me down with him. I'm surprised I survived at all. It sounds exceedingly dull to the truth Will knows in his heart.
I'd say. You both should have drowned.
You're telling me, he mutters, fiddling with his hands. A couple sits down beside them. The lounge is populating fast. His heart strains from the pressure. He wasn't good with crowds then, and he isn't good with them now.
You're coming to me today with unreleased information about the crime scene, yes? A special tidbit to tide over those who don't quite understand the full picture. What is it the news neglected to tell us, Will?
For a moment, he considers walking out. Francis Dollarhide brought a camera to record Lecter's death. It was filming when the fight started. I believe it was confiscated for evidence by the FBI. And apparently the public knows nothing about it. Freddie blinks and then writes hastily in her notebook.
How do you know it was impounded by the FBI?
A hunch. He lies. It's not as if he wants to rat Jack out. But, seeing as I was there, I can tell you there was a recording camera at the scene. Currently, I have no clue where it is.
Well, Mr. Graham,
She announces chipperly.
I'm sure Tattle Crime and its readership will be thanking you for such a compelling contribution to the Ripper Dragon conversation. Now on to some more personal questions.
Hair-boring topics like where he sees himself in a few years' time and how the trauma of being a special agent for the FBI has affected him. He pulls statements out of his ass, and he's sure Freddie knows he's doing so. It doesn't matter if both of them are aware this is fabricated, as long as Tattle Crime's readers desire to click on it. She wraps it up, jittery yet satisfied. Will feels spent. After the recording is shut off, Freddie claps her hands together.
You've just opened up a whole new set of doors for me. Thank you, Will.
I didn't do it for you. Freddie scoffs.
Obviously, I know that. Trust me. I might not want you on my bad side, but I really don't want you on my good side either. I'd prefer it if you stay away from most of my sides.
Now that we can agree on. She flips through a separate notepad and rips out a page with red lettering on it. It is a list of addresses and crudely copied information about flight plans. She reads the confusion on his face easily.
This is what I'm giving you in return. Like I said, I haven't found much, but I've discovered that employees from these private hospitals have been regularly sent on paid excursions to Lithuania. My sources have narrowed down that they've been specifically seen coming in and out of the Lecter estate.
Why would American private hospitals be sending anyone out there?
Beats me, but each of these facilities is administrated or shareholded by, Frederick Chilton. I thought it was interesting.
Will's brow creases. What business could Frederick have in Hannibal's childhood home? He's gripped with a strange possessiveness. For anyone to enter that shimmering, fairy tale-like world other than him, other than Hannibal or his family, it's an erroneous sensation, not bound by logic. This is useful. Thank you.
Attaboy.
She packs up her things with a smug grin. A stray customer whistles at her as he struts by. Her head snaps up, and once she takes in the sight of him, she winks and continues packing. Will is standing uncomfortably, ready to leave, and can't help but to try to rein her in, just for old time's sake, while he still has any influence whatsoever. Easy on Crawford, he's given up a lot.
If he wants to play nice, we'll see.
Freddie's eyes narrow, and she says,
You look white as a sheet. You should think about getting some sun.
Will doesn't bother telling her about the fever. He just sighs through his nose and nods. Will opts to leave without a farewell. She'll do what she will with the information. He just hopes her last article on the subject isn't entirely damning. For Jack's sake. The streets of Baltimore are as unfamiliar to him as they used to be. The wind is cold on his cheeks as he struts out of the lounge, and he's relieved to get into the stuffy silence of his truck. Will wonders what he would find if he drove by Hannibal's old house. Instead, he plans on if he should buy a plane ticket or a boat. He has a long trip ahead of him,